Oh man, how are you? So I've been getting a lot of questions about crappie fishing, bluegill fishing, shellcracker fishing, all that stuff. Why am I not bass fishing? So I'll just make a little short video to talk about all of it. But essentially, I've been I kind of made a concerted effort this year to get better at pan fishing in general for a couple of reasons. Partially because we like to eat fish, and so I wanted to spend time getting good at catching them at all seasons. And so, used to, I would just crappie fish in the fall. I would bass fish all year, and I would take about a month off to clear my head. And because I really like catching crappie on a jig, and I could do it really well in the fall when they would gang up and get on brush piles over deep water. And I got to where I was pretty good at it. I could go catch my limit every time I went. So it just started becoming something I did. So I would, ledge fish or whatever all summer and topwater fish in the fall, and then when that kind of petered out, I'd switch gears and go chase crappie. And so I really enjoyed that. I got to where I was like looking forward to that time period to go crappie fishing. And I was like, why don't you just start figuring crappie out and start talking to guys that are good at it, and just start chasing them, through different seasons and different areas and learning different parts of the lake. And so the last year or two, I've spent time doing that. And fishing with guys like Tony Shepard and talking to some of the guides on the lake like Josh Lovett and some of the other guys that are good fishermen that I respect, Lee Anderson, just picking their brains, Daniel Ellis, just talking to guys that catch fish consistently and just, okay, I see this, what do you see? And we go back and forth and trade information just on what we're seeing on, because a lot of us fish on different parts of the lake. Guys fish on Barkley and fish down south and Tennessee, and so it's nice to, be able to bounce stuff off of good fishermen that know what they're talking about. But I kind of learned, I would kind of take what I learned from fall fishing, and then, as we got into winter, I would try to follow them a little more. And okay, they go out into deeper water and they behave like this, and they're not one to chase as much. And, you start to, they suspend more, and, you start to be able to pattern them a little better. Well, and then spring rolls around. Okay, I'm figuring out where everyone thought, crappie, it's spawning time in the spring, they're just going to run to the bank and spawn on cover. And I don't think that hardly happens on this lake anymore. I think you get small windows where fish will go get up on the bank and do their thing. But I think more often than not, the fish are spawning on cover, but not visible cover all the time that you can see, and definitely not up against the bank. I think more of the fish are spawning in cover, out in the middle of pockets and coves, and out deeper than most guys think. And so, instead of looking in 2 foot of water, you're looking in 4 to 8 feet of water. And cover you don't see with your naked eye, you see on your electronics. And, with forward facing Solmar, Garmin Live Scope, I've been able to learn and watch the fish on the screen and understand how they behave as it changes from season to season, when they're guarding around a piece of cover opposed to feeding around a piece of cover, opposed to suspending over open water or around bait, relating to structure in deep water, not just stumps and wood cover, but the actual contours of the bottom. And they love low light conditions, and you start to learn, it's July and it's 109 degrees. I'm not going crappie fishing at 2 p.m. I'm getting up super early, and I'm going for a few hours, and I'm off the water by like 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning. Because, you can still catch them. There's just a lot more activity in those first few hours. Same thing in the evening. There's a lot more activity that last hour before dark. I actually think in the mornings you get more activity for a longer period, and in the evenings you get kind of a shorter window of activity. One thing I'd like to try that I've not got to play around with much is fishing lights at night. I've not got to do that any, and I would like to see. I know, like down in Georgia, and, guys just crush them doing that. Down in Alabama, I don't know if that's a thing here or not. I don't know a lot of guys that do it. I'm sure you can catch crappie at night. It would take a process of figuring out what it is they actually do when the sun goes down. So, but no, just back to the panfish thing. I've gotten over the years where I really enjoy eating bluegill, eating crappie, and we don't eat a ton, once or twice a month. And because of that, the whole notion of just stockpiling fish in the freezer just kind of got to be silly to me. If you're going to do a fish fry and have a bunch of people over, it makes sense. I get it. If you're just cooking for your own family, like, I would just rather get good enough where I could go catch a handful every time I went, regardless of the season, and have fresh fish. I mean, that's the whole thing. I want to catch fresh, wild caught fish and have them for dinner that night or the next night. I might leave them on ice and fillet them the next day and eat them that next day. And so I've gotten to doing that a lot more. And then the other part would be, I've enjoyed learning their behavior, playing with different techniques, vertical jigging. I'm a caster. That's what I feel most comfortable doing. I want to stay off of fish and cast to them. I don't want to be right on top of them. I actually think you get more bites if you'll do that. I can catch them vertical jigging, but I think I catch a lot more fish, and I think you catch the aggressive big fish if you stay away from the cover. And so there's just things you just learn by watching the fish on the screen, and there obviously are times where they don't want to chase a jig. You got to leave it there in front of them. Vertical jigging's going to trump everything else. I'm actually starting to play with slip corking a little more. I haven't done that a lot, but I'm starting to see where if you could stay off of the fish and leave the jig where it is, there's something to be said for that. So I'm experimenting with that still, but enjoying that part of the process. And then, bluegill shell crackers, it's been a weird year, but they've been shallow all year. They got shallow towards the end of May, and there wasn't a whole bunch of them up in May. Typically, like for us here on Kentucky Lake, bluegill shell crackers come to spawn in May. They'll spawn May and June. There's a handful maybe in July. This year there was hardly any in May. The big wave of them came towards the end of June, and there's a huge wave that came the end of July. And the better bluegills have been in July. So it's interesting to me just seeing that. We just had a real late spring here. We had a lot of cold fronts late, like in April, that just kind of pushed everything back. We still had real cool water temps, going into Memorial Day weekend. So the bluegills, they generally don't start getting up there to spawn until it's like 80 degrees. But same thing. I've enjoyed learning. I've learned more this year about shell crackers than I have probably in the previous 10 years. How they bite. I wrote a big long article on Wired to Fish about it. But just the nature of how they bite, the kind of areas they use, transition areas, just like bass do pre-spawn. They'll gang up and get in ditches and before they move up to make beds and spawn. And when they make beds, it's interesting. There'll be 2 or 3 shell crackers off by themselves, and they're real territorial and guard, and they don't always feed when they're like that. It's better when you can catch them pre-spawn staging, like in a little bit deeper area just off from where they're planning to spawn. I think you have a lot better success catching them when they're like that. When they get on a bed, it's interesting. They'll not always bite. Even when you can see them on the screen and know you're right on top of them, it's interesting how many of those fish you can't get to bite. I catch a lot of shell crackers that I visibly see, so they will spawn in ultra shallow water. They like to be around something like cover. And then I think, what I've understood, what little research I've been able to do on them, because there's not a lot of information about them, but knowing what I know about like the shell crackers and red ears in Lake Havasu and how deep those guys see them bedding, how deep they catch those fish other times of the year. I think they get super deep. I think in the summer and the winter months, we don't see them as much. And I think part of that is because they're way deeper than we're fishing. I think they get out there, and I don't know anything about the shells. I would love to learn from somebody that knows about like crustaceans and shells. Do the shells get out there in 30 and 40 and 50 feet of water? And if so, is that what the red ear shell crackers go do? Do they go out there and feed in those ultra deep shells in the summer and in the hotter and colder months? I'd just be interested to know that. But it does seem like they up and get out of the shallows. You'll see some come back in the fall, but not very many. It's pretty hard to pattern them in the fall. Again, it's feeding areas, so it takes a lot of looking and finding and a real concerted effort to kind of catch them more in the fall. But I would be interested to know if you could, if they got offshore, if you could pattern them in the summer. I think that would be really interesting to learn. But yeah, so I mean, I've enjoyed chasing the panfish. You know, big thing for Kentucky Lake. It's not been easy to catch bass, and so I'm traveling more to go fish for bass. I'm going and fishing other lakes and fishing with other people, and so when I get home and I want to fish, do I want to go on Kentucky Lake and you might catch 2, 3, 4 keepers? You know, if you have a good day, you might catch a limit. Nah, you know, yes and no. I mean, I love bass fishing. It'll always be my first love, but I've enjoyed the time. I've spent more time at home and enjoyed learning something I didn't already know. Like crappie was I know how to catch crappie. Do I know how to catch them all the time, every season? Absolutely not. Do I know every good area on the lake? Absolutely not. You know, learning bass fishing, I spent May to October one year scanning ledges when I first started understanding how to find fish on ledges, and I put in hundreds of hours. And you say hundreds of hours and people are like, yeah, whatever. No, I'm telling you, like, I would go 5 or 6 times a week and I would idle for 6, 7, 8 hours every day that I could go. And I idled from the dam down past the Paris Bridge, down one side of the river and back up the other. I've idled most of the big bays. I've idled their ledges inside of there. So I spent, several years understanding ledges and timing of ledges and seasons of ledges. What ledges are good early in the season, what ledges are good late in the season, what ledges are good in the mornings, what ledges are good in the afternoons. When I see the fish a certain way on the ledges, what are they going to best react to? What schools have already been busted up and educated on ledges, and I can tell that on the screen. And so I spend a lot of time just patterning them, chasing them around, learning them, finding them again in the winter. Finding big schools of fish offshore in the winter. I'm doing that same thing with panfish, because that was the really enjoyable part for bass fishing for me here, was just exploring and finding a new area and getting on a scrape and then being like, oh man, that was awesome. Feel like I found something nobody else has found and got to enjoy the benefits of that. And so I feel like I'm doing the same thing with crappie and shellcrackers now. So yeah, I mean, that's as simple as it is for me. I like the hunt for them. I like figuring things out on my own. I do talk to guys. I talk to anglers. I don't fish with a ton of people. There's a handful of guys I trust and go fish with and will share information with, because I think the information they've already shared with me has been extremely valuable. So I try to share everything I can with them. But I keep that circle real small. I think every good angler is that way. Like, I don't share information with 100 people. I share information with 4 people, 5 people who I trust. And I know that if I give them good information, they're going to go expand on it and share what they learned. And so it benefits us both all the time to kind of have that open relationship with other good anglers. So I found more of that with crappie fishing and shellcracker fishing this year. A handful of guys that are really good at it at these lakes. Like I say, Tony Shepard and Daniel and Josh, and even Will Roby's really good at catching shellcrackers. And so I've enjoyed sharing information with guys and learning about that stuff. So I'll keep experimenting, I'll keep playing. I sold my boat, and Crestliner people were awesome and let me borrow one of their demo boats that they take people out for rides in to, when they're thinking about buying one. So they let me use one for a couple weeks, and I really appreciate them doing that. And then, I've got a new boat coming, so I'm chomping at the bit to get it all set up exactly like I want. I've been a little limited with graphs and everything, so ready to get my electronic system set back up and go hunting again. That's a big reason why I haven't bass fished as much this year. I've just been real limited on my setup this year, so I've had to basically, when I do go bass fishing, I've got to fish shallow. So, which is fine. I don't mind to do that. I like to do that. Even in the summer, I fish shallow and don't mind it. But it's just I'm a little limited on what I can go do, and I can't go graph and scan for schools because I don't have a graph at the console right now. So once I get my boat in August, hopefully, I'll be back to square one again. So I appreciate the guys that have let me hop in a boat and film and shoot pictures and test products, and because that's a big part of what we do, obviously. And so it's been good to travel and get and see some new waters. And but no, that's kind of where I'm at with why I haven't bass fished as much this year, why I've chased panfishes more this year. And obviously I'm going enough to, review new product and things like that, bass fishing wise, and continuing to fish and film with guys. So that's been good. But, I'm anxious to get back to fishing on my own again, bass fishing a lot more. And I think the lake's turning the corner here. So I think, 2022, we'll start to see schools show up in a lot more places on the ledges, because there'll be a lot more 2-pounders in the system, which is what you need to make schools. And there's a handful of good fish still in the lake. They don't all die at the same time, but you get big holes in your population. It takes a while for it to all cycle back. But so 2022, we'll start to see a lot more schools of fish, and I think 2023 we'll start to see really good weights again. So it'll start to be the tournament lake that everyone remembers, and we won't all have to run down to Pickwick to fish offshore. But no, until then, I'm going to enjoy exploring and trying new things, and looking forward to having a new boat to go run around and do that in, and I've appreciated being able to borrow one to get work done in the meantime. And so yeah, that's kind of how my season's going this year.